Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today, George Plaster of Nashville Sports Radio. This show presented by the Well Coffee House, a Nashville area coffee house that provides fresh roast coffee along with house-made pastries, breakfast and lunch offerings as well. There are 4 locations to serve you in the Nashville area: Brentwood, Green Hills, downtown, and Bellevue. You can get more information at wellcoffeehouse.org. The Well Coffee House, where coffee changes lives. We thank our co-sponsor, Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center, which is located in the Gulch. Today's news presented by Sutherland and Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in any type of accident, call Taylor or Russell at 615-846-6200. See what your rights are and if they can help. Vanderbilt basketball improves to 7-4 with an 88-73 victory over UNC Wilmington at Memorial Gym on Saturday night. Aaron Nesmith scores a career-high 34 points in that one. The guest line, presented by our friends Scott and Missy Tannen at Boll & Branch. Had no clue how comfortable sheets could be until I got Boll & Branch sheets. They are fair trade certified, meaning they are made under safe conditions by men and women, treated and paid fairly. Try them free for a month. You can return them, but you won't want to. Once you get the sheets, try the mattress, which was voted best mattress of 2018. Go to bollandbranch.com. That is spelled B-O-L-L. Enter the promo code Vandy and get $50 off your first set of sheets. We welcome George Plaster to the show. George has been a friend of the program this year, and this has really been a fun episode to do with you every week. And George, I've appreciated you joining us this year, and these have been very interesting, and I think today's will be as well.
Well, listen, I've enjoyed doing this as well, Chris. Have enjoyed getting to know you a little bit. You do some great work in this stuff, and I got to watch you actually do a podcast back in August, which I technologically know nothing about. And so it was a real eye-opener to get to see that.
I probably made it look harder than it is.
No, for me, you probably made it look easier than it is. As I was watching that, I was like, oh, how in the world did he do that?
Well, I think we're both where we need to be. That the podcast has been a fun thing for me to do, and I'm happy that you're back in radio and found a home and a good time slot and a good show, to be honest.
Well, you're nice to say that. I've had a good time with it. The folks over at WNSR have kind of given me the freedom to do the show the way I want to, and Watson Brown and Terry McCormick have been terrific. You guys that got them together for lunch a few weeks ago, I think the chemistry they've had has been amazing.
Well, I think I speak for a lot of people. You have been a Nashville radio institution. I grew up listening to your shows, and I'm really happy that you have found a good landing spot. And happy to have you on the podcast because, as I've told you, you're one of the few guys that can kind of understand what it's like being on this beat when things are really weird or tough or whatever adjectives you want to use. There are plenty of them, and we will get into those later in the show. But I want to start with just a Christmas thing. Man, this is a fun time of the year for me. I've got a 5-year-old son who's completely into sports and an 8-year-old girl. Santa is still very much a thing, and I had great Christmases growing up. So I want to start with just asking you a question. What's the best Christmas present you ever got?
Oh, gosh. Well, I'll tell you this. I don't know if it was the best one, but I'll never forget. An uncle on my mom's side of the family, as a little kid, gave me one of these Vroom trucks. Loud. Oh, it ticked off my mother. I remember she let my uncle absolutely have it. What kind of gift is this?
Those are the best.
I loved it.
Although I think the people I find that the people that that give your kids noisy, annoying toys, maybe you have to reevaluate that relationship a little bit.
Well, I'm not sure that it's so much that they want your kids to have this great toy as it is they want to annoy you a little bit.
Exactly. Like when my mother-in-law gave my son a drum set a couple of birthdays ago.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Part of it is, it's great for the kid, but if they can inflict a little misery on you, so much the better.
Exactly. I'm thinking back to when I was a kid, and we didn't have a ton. I mean, we weren't poor. We never missed a meal, but we grew up in one of those families where we never had new cars, didn't have brand name clothes, went to public school, those sorts of things. But Christmas and birthdays were pretty spectacular. I remember one year we got a pinball machine. I think I was in junior high. I think we got some great gifts. We got an Atari 2600, I think back in 1982, which was a pretty fantastic gift, and that thing got used hundreds of hours. So that's right up there too. But a pinball machine, that may have taken the cake. That was pretty good. The problem with the pinball machine is it was defective. I think they had some sort of a serial defection, and I think we returned it and got another one back. It had the same issue, so eventually it went away. But that was a pretty spectacular gift. I remember hopping off the bus, and we had it in our side room of the house, which is where we went in and out. So I would walk in the door, and the pinball machine was right there. I'm not sure a lot of days that I ever made it even to the kitchen. I think I just threw my books down on the pool table right next to it and went at pinball, and that was really cool when you were a teenager.
That is good stuff, man. I remember, Chris, when I was at BGA, I had a classmate, and we were always making fun of what Christmas gifts we would get. And it got to a point where all we did, we would say two words, and it was meager gifts. And now we're 40 years later. I put a call into him this summer, didn't identify myself at all, just said, meager gifts, call me.
Oh, high school one-liners are the best.
Let me ask you this. Have you watched Christmas Vacation?
Oh, of course.
I've seen it about 3 times this year on the AMC channel. I'll always just turn over there if I haven't got anything else going on. That, when you see it a few more times, like probably 25 over the years, you find some things that are absolutely hysterical that you didn't notice. Gosh, the people that wrote that thing, what a talent.
The little lights aren't twinkling.
It was an ugly tree.
I think I've dropped those lines on our message board before. Well, of course, the other one is Christmas Story, which my wife is not into, which makes me question a lot of things. But that's the other one that I bet I've watched that one start to finish a dozen times, and that still cracks me up.
Yeah. It's the go-to. You just keep going to it.
Does TBS still run that one 24 hours straight on, I think, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah, those are the classics. Of course, A Wonderful Life is in there too, although that's a different type of movie. But yeah, Christmas Vacation is that's up there. I mean, both those are up there on my list of favorite movies.
You know what's weird, Chris? I guess I've experienced one time in my life a white Christmas. And you have to go way back. It was 1968 in Nashville. Supposedly the high Wednesday will be about 69 degrees. That kind of makes for sort of a weird deal.
We had a year, I want to say it was around 88, because I think I was still in high school, where we got maybe an inch or two of snow. I remember going out in the backyard and throwing football with my brothers and an uncle. So we've had it on occasion, but it's not very often, and it's not much. And I just came from Colorado a month ago where we got 18 inches of snow for Thanksgiving. So even if we got an inch or two, it just sounds like we're not going to. That's kind of hard to live up to now.
Oh gosh, you got to experience something I would love to see. And thanks for sharing the pictures, because those were awesome.
Yeah, it was everything I hoped it would be. But I'm looking forward to this. When you have kids, that becomes the focus of your attention and sort of the focus of your Christmas, and rightfully so. And I may have shared this story on the podcast before. I don't think it would have been with you, but you've met my son. He is going to be 6 in February. And last Christmas, my brother-in-law and his wife, they came in town, which they have since had a child, their first, so it'll be their first Christmas with the baby boy, which will be fun for them. But they came in and they spent time with us and our kids on Christmas Day. And David, who loves sports, and I got to take him to his first Titans game last week, thanks to Andrew Fitzgerald, who's one of our listeners. And Andrew, you're probably listening. Those tickets were appreciated more than you know. But he just loves sports. And so he got these 2 little field goals. And so he's out with my brother-in-law kicking in our backyard. It's 35 degrees, and to him it might as well be 75 because kids are oblivious to cold at that age when they're having fun. So he's out in the backyard and he's kicking field goals, and he makes one, and my brother-in-law's out there with him, and he makes his field goal, and he takes an abrupt 90-degree turn and walks over to our deck, and he starts staring straight into the deck. And Corey is like, what is he doing? So 10 seconds, he sits there staring at the deck. He's got his hands to the side of his face on each side, and he turns around and he says, upon further review, the kick was good.
Oh, that's beautiful.
My wife thinks I might have let him watch a little too much football. I don't know.
Well, she may have a point. That's hysterical. That's the world we live in now. Everything's up for review.
Yeah, I mean, our Sundays are, he will watch the Titans with me in our bonus room, and he insists that I will play him in football while we're watching. So, with rules that are very carefully engineered by him. So,
I don't doubt that. That's awesome.
But it's a lot of fun. Well, we're 10 minutes in, and people are probably wondering when we're going to talk Vanderbilt sports. And this will be the time. There were all kinds of rumors flying around the last couple of weeks about a lot of things that I will get into. Is it just me, or does it seem like, I don't know, the truth is almost harder to get at with Vanderbilt than it's ever been?
Well, some of it, is the benefit of being a private school is that you don't have to release every last, burp that goes on inside an athletic department. And, for reporters, it makes it a little bit harder to get into what's going on. But for the school, it's probably a big advantage.
Well, and here's the world that I live in, and you to a certain degree too. You get things that get leaked, and you ask yourself a few questions. Do I know this person? Do I know where this info is coming from? Has this person been reliable in the past? Those sorts of things. And then if you get another source on a certain thing, you start asking yourself the same thing. Would this person have a way of knowing? Is this person connected to the first person? And if you start hearing things that you can corroborate independently, in other words, maybe the leak for the first thing isn't the same as the leak for the second thing. And again, they're people that you can trust and you think you know where stuff is coming from. That's when you start to feel like you're onto something. This year, for me, and really this goes back to the AD search almost. And sometimes you also have sources that are outside your school that you cover, which I have several of those as well. Those are helpful. But it seemed like this year, George, I would get one thing from a source I would trust, and then I would have another source that I've always been able to trust. And these aren't always the same people, but just I use this in saying different sources. You'd find a second source that you had been given good info in the past, and a lot of times source one and source two were saying very different things, which made me wonder, like, is Vanderbilt now just gotten in the business of leaking things to see what gets out and use that as a way of tracing who said what? I mean, it's gotten to that point almost.
Well, it's a tough job when you're trying to track down rumors. I'll tell you a funny story real quick because now it's long enough ago that it doesn't really matter. When Bobby Johnson announced his resignation, I kind of beat everybody to the punch. I had a piece of information that was unbelievably good and accurate. and I beat Bobby Johnson to the ability to even talk to his football team, which I felt terrible about after the fact. Well, at the end of that season, Robbie Caldwell gets fired, dismissed, however you want to call it, the day of his final game against Wake Forest. And I put out a story that one of the people that they were in the middle of talking to was the Navy offensive coordinator, a guy named Ivin Jasper. And if you bring up Ivin Jasper to either Willie or Darren, you'll get this big grin, because, I put this out here and I got it. If I were to tell you where I got it, you'd say that's pretty darn reliable. Well, in this case, it wasn't true. And Vandy reacted, as though I had joined the Communist Party, which they probably should have. But it kept bothering me that, I'd gotten this from a really good place, and for once, apparently it wasn't true. So about a year and a half later, we had the Navy football coach, Ken Niumatalolu, on the air with us. And so during the break, before we put him on, I picked up the phone and just said, I've got to ask you something. I said, was Ivin Jasper ever in the Vandy coaching search when they hired, I guess it was James Franklin they hired after Robbie Caldwell? Yeah. And so Niumatalolu says, no, he says he was never in it. He said, but we became aware that somebody was putting that out there. And I said, it was me. And I said, just pass on my apologies to him. I said, apparently I got the story wrong. I felt like I had a good source. And that's one of the frustrations when you report things is if you end up being wrong, it may be a source that over the years has been really good. There's somebody out there that swears that Ivin Jasper was on campus, at some point during that search. And, I can laugh about it now, but at the time, it wasn't working out real good.
Well, even, even your very best sources are not right 100% of the time. And sometimes something can be right at the moment you report it, and then it changes, and then you look like an idiot. And that's a nightmare because a lot of times no amount of backtracking can save you in that spot.
I think the best thing was, I don't think social media was anywhere like what it is now. And I probably benefited from that.
Oh, social media now you would get blistered with that. But you're right. I mean, we've all, let's be honest, we've all had that happen at one point or another. Something that you get good information, it may even be the right information, and then the story can change on a dime, and you look like a moron.
Yeah, and I did.
Well, and covering the AD search was like that. And I found this to increasingly be the thing at Vanderbilt. It seems like a lot of times you will narrow right in on where things are headed, and then everything takes a 180, and then sometimes it'll take a 180 back the direction it was headed in the first place. I don't know if it's like a calculated campaign of misinformation and misdirection, but it has seemed that way a lot the last year or two when you cover this beat.
Yeah, it's I know it's frustrating. I don't do as much of that as I used to. One of the things that you used to always hear was this whole so-and-so is headed to such and such to talk to coach such and such. We have the number of the plane, the whatever it is that identifies the plane, and that person's on that plane.
Yeah, I've got one of those plane stories. I probably won't share it today, but I had the owner of a plane call me one time and get a good laugh over a rumor involving his plane and where it was headed and that sort of thing. And it was kind of completely a coincidence as to what the public narrative was at the time. But both of us had a good laugh over that.
Well, let me ask you this.
Sure.
Was the plane headed to Wichita State?
Yes, that is exactly it. You had the same
that?
one. Yes. Did you get a call from the owner of the plane as well?
No, I did not.
Yeah.
But I remember that rumor.
Yeah, and
Also,
I'm still not convinced that Greg Marshall was 100% separated from that coaching search.
it's almost like the rumor we used to put out in high school. There's 4 inches of snow in Memphis, and it's headed this way.
Exactly. This little harder to track, or a little easier to track those rumors today than they were. Well, that's the other
Oh
thing.
yeah,
When you get into coaching, you have all kinds of plausible deniability. No, I never spoke to so and so, and the guy's telling the truth. That's because his agent spoke to so and so.
right. And there's just a lot of double talk and that kind of stuff and semantics and you have to try to weed through that. You also have to, if you're a reporter, say, well, okay, did any representative of you talk to so and so?
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes you get to the point where you ask enough of the right questions, and it's hard to continue to use that person as a source because sometimes just asking the question puts everybody in a bad spot.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Well, and I want to go back
Um,
to the AD. Go ahead. I'll let you finish your thought,
okay,
and then
no,
I
no,
have
go
one.
ahead,
Well, I was just
go
going
ahead.
to say,
I've got nothing good.
um, like the AD search. Okay, that was wrapping up this time last year, and I was told from as good authority as you can get on the front end that we're looking for people that have worked at similar schools, and know what it's like to work at a work atmosphere at Vanderbilt, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I promise you that was the direction of the search from the outset. And then, it gets to be Thanksgiving-ish or maybe a little bit before they were apparently closing in. And what I was told was Boo Corrigan and Army was all but hired at Vanderbilt. And then something changed. They do a 180. And then next thing you know, they go totally outside what I was told the search parameters were from the beginning. And they end up with Malcolm Turner, who I don't think has ever worked a day in college athletics. So sometimes these things, like, again, I go back to the whole thing that you can be right with your info in the beginning, and the way that something ends up makes you look like a fool because that wasn't at all what I was told they were targeting.
Oh, I remember Corrigan was the name. That was the hot name that started to get out there, and maybe there was something to it, and it blew up at some point. But you're right. That was the big hot rumor.
Well, and I think it was more than a rumor. I was told that he
Yeah.
flat out wanted that job too, and whatever happened from there, it was bizarre. But that went from they were on the verge of hiring him to they pulled the plug on it to Malcolm Turner's now a candidate. I mean, it was just like bang, 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 and we're all just sitting there going, "Where did this come from?"
Here's the more at times would reach out to a media person. I can remember having a conversation on the phone one time with Mike Riley, who wanted the Vanderbilt job when Rod Dowhauer got it. Another one like that was Mike Bray at Notre Dame, and Mike was really being pushed for the Vandy job when Jan Van Bredekoff got it, and the person, touting him pretty hard was Billy McCaffrey. You don't see that these days where you end up having a conversation with a coach because you now have agents for a coach and they stop a lot of that kind of stuff. But in the old days, it was amazing what you might find out and who might call who, and it was probably more fun then.
Have you ever had a coach reach out to you to get in the middle of a search that's going on? Either
Absolutely.
directly,
I've
yeah,
had
I have too.
Chris, for whatever reason, I've gotten into way more of these kind of things over the years, um, than I probably should have. I think the proudest one that I ever got involved in was Dave Luce at Austin P. Dave had been an assistant on the Memphis State team that I broadcast, and a year and a half later, when the job opened, Dave wanted it. And I called the athletic director and just said, look, I'm not trying to tell you how to conduct your search, but I am asking for one favor. And that favor is that you interview this guy and then you'll figure it out and you'll hire him. And Tim Weiser and I got a big laugh over that at Dave Luce's retirement party a couple of years ago because, gosh, what a job Dave Luce did there.
Well, let's switch to Vanderbilt for a minute. There are two sets of rumors floating around right now, or that have been floating around, some of them having to do with football coaching, some of them having to do with facilities. Let's hit the coaching ones first. It was a pretty hot and heavy rumor the last few days that Vanderbilt might be making a change at coordinator or maybe coordinators, that they might even be going down over the weekend. We are now doing this at Monday. It is 9:30. To my knowledge, nothing has happened. What do you make of that whole situation?
Well, on the offensive side, they're going to have to do something. I don't think that they can just trot out the same cast of characters that they did a year ago. The productivity was so bad. I don't know how you could possibly do that. Um, Defensively, that may be a little bit of a different story, but on the offensive side, I don't think they have any choice. When I say they, ultimately Derek Mason, to try and bring back, intact the same group that put together what they put together. I just don't see how they can do it. To me, the worst thing on that report card is the fact that they had players, Kalijah Lipscomb and Jared Pinkney, who had proven to be big time SEC contributors. And for whatever reason this year, they didn't get anything out of them. And at times you looked around and it didn't look like they were trying to.
Well, Derek was telling recruits about this quote unquote new offense that they're going to run, which begged a ton of questions. The most of which is who's running it, because if you don't know who's running the offense, how do you know what offense you're going to run? Now, Vanderbilt's a weird place. The background checks are pretty extensive. Maybe it is simple as he's got a guy and they're hung up in that process, which is going to be long enough. And now you throw the holidays in the middle of it. Maybe it's as simple as that. But I thought that the way that he communicated things to recruits in that process, and these were things that recruits would say when we would talk to them, begged a lot of questions.
Well, first of all, I guess I don't pay a lot of attention these days to what Derek puts out there because I've found over the last 12 months that there's just not a lot of there's not a lot of substance there. If you look back at some of the quotes that he has put out there, um, I, I've come to the I'll category. And
George, I lost you there for a second, but yeah, it has been. Well, I'm just going to go in a different direction here. Back to the coaching. Okay, in my mind, there are two kinds of candidates who want this job right now. One, the kind of candidate who's maybe a has been or is maybe in the process of being let go from another school, or somebody that can't get a really good job right now, that is desperate to have this one because it's going to pay six figures, it's going to be in the SEC, it is employment for another year. The other type of candidate who wants this job might be one who cannot get an offensive coordinator or a defensive coordinator position at this level right now, as an up and comer, maybe a position coach, a young person who wants a coordinator's job to prove what he can do. And part of that carrot may be it could be somebody that has an eye on the head coaching job at Vanderbilt if that were to open in a year, which makes it a really weird spot to make a hire from.
well, when they made the decision that they were going to retain Derek Mason, it looks like a scenario where we're going to go through this whole thing again about this time next year. On paper at the moment, this doesn't look like a scenario where you're going to do a lot of winning. Now, that said, I've been wrong before. Derek Mason has proven me wrong in the past about the time I've counted him out. He seems to be one of those guys who's got 9 lives. But the bottom line is, once they made that decision, it's going to be very difficult to get somebody good. You've raised a couple of the issues of who might be out there that's interested. There may also be a scenario where that person says to a Malcolm Turner, look, the odds of me being here more than a year and gainfully employed are not very good. You're going to have to promise me a second year of employment pay wise. And that may well be something they're having to deal with. Again, I don't know that, but I think conventional wisdom just makes you suggest that this is a scenario that could be real.
Well, and I spent part of the weekend chasing stuff down, and I have contacts in the industry at other schools, and the response that I've run into is been, and I say, hey, look, this is just me chasing down rumor. I cannot tell you if it's true or not. I'm just asking because it's my job. And the response that I get on the other end is with all due respect, why would so and so want to go and take that job right now?
Yeah, it's a tough deal. I think if they do make a change in offensive coordinator, the likelihood is that it's somebody who has the ability to take it, knowing full well that it's perhaps only for a year, and because of that person's unique circumstance, it doesn't matter.
Well, the other kind of rumors I've been chasing a lot lately, and I know you have been as well, are the facilities rumors. And I was told, oh man, this would have been September of 2018, and this was by a tremendous source. And if he says it, he would know what's going on. He said, look, things are about to change here. It may be a couple years before you can announce certain things, but he said, trust me, that the time is about to be different around here. We're going to do some big things. And the numbers that I keep privately hearing and regarding of what's been raised, what they're targeting, um, support from Vanderbilt institutionally in a couple of ways have been pretty mind blowing and almost to the point where I don't think the public would believe them at this point, which not that I blame them, but I also trust the people who have been telling me stuff. Now, if they don't deliver, that's on them, but I am telling you what I've been hearing from credible sources. And the latest set of rumors last week around facilities were that they were going to build an entirely new football stadium. And I think it's going to be in the parking lot of the hospital lot, that huge lot across from the practice field. I had been hearing a lot of undercurrents about that this last summer. That was a possibility that I believe had been explored. Um, that was one possible location that seemed to be popping up again last week. I'm not 100% sure on that, but that's what I was gathering. And the one that floored me probably more than that was that they were going to build an entirely new baseball field on the current site of Vanderbilt Stadium. I think that they would build it on the south end zone, which I guess is the open end zone. And then there would be a parking garage in the north spot or the north end zone. Now, I had somebody reach out to me that's pretty well up the food chain at Vanderbilt saying that was not true. Sometimes when you get a denial, it's because it is what it is and it's not true. Sometimes when you get a denial, it's that you've hit too closely to the truth and they're not ready for that to be out. Hard for me to know which is which at this point, but I say that to kind of cover all bases. But that surprised me. But the reason behind that was that apparently they may want to expand Hawkins Field, and in the current footprint, it's harder to do that. But I've said this. I don't know what the truth is going to end up being. They might not even know what the truth is going to end up being. They may have multiple plans out there. And until stuff gets approved by the board, it really doesn't matter. But again, everything I continue to hear indicates that they are aiming really high. And I was talking to a source last week, at the end of last week. This guy's been pretty good with info. And we were talking about Mason being retained and that being unpopular and the facility stuff. And he had some info for me too as well that was I don't know that it's a contradictory from all that, but also a little more info. Apparently, they were looking at also building a student athlete building. I guess with I don't know if it'd be training or whatnot, but there's another facility in construction that's also been discussed. And we were just talking about everything, and I don't think that we're all just kind of bouncing around what we're hearing, and wondering what it'll end up looking like. And he says to me, he says, really, I think from what I'm hearing, the way they're headed, the numbers, the plans are so big. I think it's going to shock everybody. And they may be looking at this with Mason saying, hey, look, if we announce these things at the level that's being talked about, it's going to, A, shock everybody nationally, and B, it's going to put Derek in a situation of, okay, this is where we're going. Now it's your time to try to keep up in terms of your coaching with where this athletic program is heading, if that makes sense. I'm sorry, that was a very long-winded monologue there, but I thought all those conversations I'd had last week were pretty interesting.
Well, let's go with some of this, Chris. First up, just as an educated guess, I would think that sometime in the month of February, that's when their board of trust meets.
Yes.
I don't know a lot about boards of trust, although I'm on one at BGA, and my guess is that the board of trust has to sign off on whatever the plan is, and so don't look for Malcolm Turner and the athletic department to be releasing a lot of info until then. That's just a guess. I hope it's an educated guess. I think it is. Here's the other thing. If I'm just going on educated guess, gut feeling, no real info, everything you hear is that in a phase one, football facilities, not the stadium, appear to be, first in line. The upgrading of weight rooms and facilities that involve football, I think will end up being in the first phase, and the stadium probably will not be. Will they announce what the plan is for the stadium? I don't know. Here's what I do know. It's hard right now, outside of rooting for Tim Corbin, to be a Vanderbilt fan. The football season was a disaster. The basketball season doesn't hold a ton of promise. And that doesn't appear to me to be Jerry Stackhouse's fault. It just appears to be the card that, he had. And in that deck, not enough SEC cash to sit there and say they're going to win 6-7 games in the conference and all that kind of stuff. I just don't think they have enough SEC caliber players. So the public, whatever number the fan base really is right now, about all they've got to hang their hat on is this promise of facilities upgrades. And so while for a lot of schools that would be nice and, it's sort of icing on the cake, here right now, it's about the only thing anybody has to hang their hat on and say, why do I continue to care? Because I think something better is coming down the road.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think even a lot of the most optimistic fans don't believe it or don't want to believe it right now, for risk of being Charlie Brown having Lucy pull the football away at the last minute. And frankly, I think that is got to be somewhat of a concern just procedurally, in that the fact that that's got to be approved by the board. Again, every indication that I have, and I think probably you could say this as well, is that Malcolm Turner is aiming very, very, very high with what he is asking for. And I think he's putting Vanderbilt's feet to the fire. I mean, he was told, we want to see what we can be. Apparently they sold it to him as they wanted to be stretched. I think he had some things written to his contract that were some safeguards against that, including control of monies and such. But this is the ultimate litmus test where they go in the coming months. And I think fans want to believe it, but I don't think most of them do.
Well, I do believe that something's going on because I don't think Malcolm Turner, would come in here and talk about these kind of things if he wasn't committed to trying to get them done. So on the subject of are they really trying to do this? I think the answer is yes. I've got every reason to think it's yes. Now, ultimately, when it goes in front of people on a board of trust, do I have as much confidence? No, I don't. Nobody does in their right mind. But we just sort of have to wait and see. It is the one area right now that people are holding out hope for because, like I said earlier, football and basketball is just not giving them much reason for hope.
Oh, morale is as low as I've ever seen.
It is, and it's an apathy kind of deal, which is really dangerous. The reaction to retaining Derek Mason, it even surprised me the level of anger that it received, and so I'm sure that I'm sure that Malcolm Turner has felt some of that. He's a smart guy. He gets on Twitter quite a bit, so he sees what people are putting out there, and it's been pretty negative.
A couple of other pieces with facilities. My understanding is they're getting the locker room renovated. I think that's going to be done by the same people that did LSU's, although I don't think it's going to be done to that ridiculous extreme, but it'll be nice from what I hear. I think that's a higher eight-figure project, or excuse me, a higher seven-figure project. But it'll be nice from what I understand. So there's that. I think that will be, I don't know if it'll be done this year, but I think they will probably start that in the coming months. Maybe I don't know if that'll be part of phase one or if that'll be a pre-phase one or whatever. But I've been hearing for a while that's basically a done deal in terms of plans. The other thing that I'm watching is the space where their outdoor track is over next to the practice facility and the student gym and stuff that's connected to it. There's been some talk. I don't know if that's where they would put another student athlete kind of building over in that spot. But that's kind of the other thing to watch out for is some sort of I don't know if it's an all-purpose building. I don't even know if that would be part of a new football stadium built inside that. But there's going to be some other sort of facility that'll be part of the student athlete enrichment that's going to be or planned, or at least in the planning stage as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, look, I haven't gone as far as you have on, but I think virtually anything and everything has been on the table. I think when they brought these consulting groups in, I think they've batted around all kinds of different options. And the thing is, there's not, I don't think, a ton of land available. They seem fairly landlocked, and so a lot of what you're putting out there makes a lot of sense because the options are limited.
Well, and again, I don't swear by any of what I've just said. I relay that to give people the temperature of the room, the things that are being bandied about. And of course, the board approval is the big thing. And so these things may be planned and that they could get nixed later for all I know. But you've got that. The other thing you talked about, landlocked, the interesting thing is they bought the Holiday Inn, and I think the J. Alexander's or whatever's over there where the cooker used to be. I think they've bought that land too. Now, Wendy's, I don't think, is sold, but they are making some moves on land on that in the campus as well. I don't know how that plays into football, but that's been the other interesting dynamic.
Well, they've been, as a university, very aggressive over the last few years. They also bought the land where Sportsman's Grill has been over on 21st Avenue. Universities, when I was at Belmont, I would hear the same kind of thing, that they try to buy as much land as they can, looking toward the future and, expansion of your whole university life. So none of that should surprise anybody.
trying to remember, does the Sportsman Grill actually touch their campus? Because that's over on the medical side of things. It might. I think there's a Mapco across the street. So that would be seem to be a little bit bigger of a reach for me in looking at that purchase. But
Well,
if you can connect the dots in between, then maybe not so much.
Chris, I know a little bit more about that than I probably should because Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Church, through a will, was a part owner of that property. So I do know a little bit more about it than I probably should.
Well, there's another land deal that I think has also been rumored as well that could have an impact on things if you get what I'm putting down.
Yeah, I think I do.
Yeah, I'll just stay away from that at this point. But there are, I think, people out there listening that probably know what I'm referring to. Anything else on facilities or coaching? Because I want to touch on Aaron Nesmith for a minute once we're done with this.
No, let's go there.
He's amazing. I mean, he gets 34 points. He's averaging, I think, over 23 a game now. Probably going to end up leading the conference in scoring. I don't know where he'll be in the Player of the Year race. The lowest he's had this year is 14. He's still been efficient. Now, we will see what happens to those percentages once conference play gets underway. I would imagine they would go down because there's almost no other way. He's shooting it so efficiently, but the kid's been amazing to watch. It's a shame he does not have a better supporting cast.
Yeah, he's a terrific player. If you remember one of the first podcasts that we did, that you and I did, where we talked about basketball, I made the joke that, he's going to have to be just the side of Michael Jordan. Well, that's probably, pretty true. He's a really good player. And I don't pretend to know the whole recruiting story as to how they came to get him. But you're right. When they get into conference play, these teams aren't stupid, and they scout each other very well. And particularly by the time they play a second go-round, teams are going to be to a point of saying, look, the supporting cast isn't strong enough. If the supporting cast beats us, so be it. But we're not letting this guy, get the shots late that matter. And I think they're going to run into a lot of that.
Well, let's face it, there's not a ton of things that really matter in this basketball season. One is, can they snap the losing streak? Because, frankly, you don't want to have a, 20-something game losing streak. If you include the tournament, if you include the year before, you don't want to have that going any longer than necessarily, because that's a talking point you just kind of want to go away, especially for recruiting. So there's that. There's when do they win an SEC game, and can they escape the cellar? Maybe if things go well, can they escape the Wednesday game in the SEC tournament? I think that's probably a lot to bite off, especially with South Carolina beating Virginia over the weekend. Carolina has not played well, and maybe that's a sign.
Where did that one come from?
Yeah, I don't know. Good question. Because that's when I've seen Carolina play, that's not consistent with what I had seen. So there's that. There's the stop the losing thing. Other than that, it is how do the younger players, the freshmen, develop, especially Dessou and Pippen. And then for that, it's to me, it's how do things set up for next year? Can they get another piece in this class? And really the most important question is, do they get Nesmith back for next year? Because I think if they get him back, you had DJ Harvey, everybody's a year older, more experienced. You can make an argument that that's maybe an NIT level team. Saban Lee would be back, I would presume. I don't know why he would go pro. I have not heard anything that indicated he would, but just presuming he is back because he would be a senior. Nesmith is one of these kids who's very academic-minded. His family's academic-minded. Sometimes that buys you an extra year with the player. That, to me, is really the biggest storyline, because if he comes back next year, then maybe they've got a chance to move towards respectability and maybe an NIT bid, or who knows, maybe if things really blow up, maybe they're in NCAA contention. But I think next year with the pieces they add in transfers, and especially DJ Harvey, then I think they've got a chance to be pretty reasonably competitive if he's in that picture.
Chris, you've laid out a lot of stuff there on basketball. To me, what they're trying, or what we're all hoping they can do, is number one, continue to play really hard. That's one thing that under Jerry Stackhouse, it appears they play really hard. Uh, it looks like they're really trying hard on the defensive end, which they're going to need to because they don't have a lot of offensive weapons. I think what you're hoping for is that when they get into late January and early February, that you start to see some signs of improvement, whether it's in wins and losses or whether it's just an individual play, that there is something that gives you a feeling that it's moving in an upward trajectory. The other thing is they probably need to get lucky somewhere in the recruiting or transfer mode. That they need somebody who can play, and hopefully, in the transfer stuff, that they are able to hit on somebody. If you want a Christmas gift, bring us Billy McCaffrey kind of player. I don't know that that's going to happen, but the other thing is, you're right. Late February into March and maybe into April, a big question at Vandy is going to be about Aaron Nesmith and what are his plans a year from now. It seems to me it would be a real gut punch if he doesn't come back, because, they lack so much what he can bring to the table. Athletic ability, basketball skill, all of the above. Man, they need it. They need him.
Ready for the mailbag.
Let's do it.
Today's mailbag is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan Josh Minton, an independent insurance agent operating out of Brentwood. Are you looking for a one-stop shop to take care of your insurance needs? Josh has you covered. Call him today at 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him at Joshua Minton HQ on Twitter or at facebook.com/JD Minton HQ. He is my insurance agent. Give him a try. Tell him you heard about it here. Raiders 1967 says, what impact, if any, did the Adam Sparks and Joe Rexrode articles last summer have on the lack of commitment of the Vanderbilt administration to football and athletics? I think I misphrased that. I think what he said was basically, what impact did that article have on what's going on now is a good way to put it.
I hope it had some, and I want to believe that it did. I think what had happened until those articles started being written, the Vanderbilt fan had just resigned themselves to the whole, nothing's ever going to happen, so why talk about it? And then David Williams came out, and I don't remember where it was from even being discussed. And I remember my reaction was, are you kidding me? I was shocked that he put that out there. Now, was it true? Probably. But I think that was sort of the impetus for Adam and Joe Rexrode to start writing, and then that created a lot of yapping. So good for them that they did.
Zeppos and Williams were so full of it between the two of those guys.
Well, I'll say this. I'm very disappointed in what Nick Zeppos's era turned out to be. I can remember him telling me when he first got the job that, he was going to be a lot like Gordon Gee. Athletics was going to be important. He was going to come on the show. He was going to take calls, and nothing to me could have been farther from the truth.
I wonder, and this is 100% speculation, if that article is not written, if Nick Zeppos is still there, there's been some private questioning whether that was the quote-unquote health resignation that it was rumored to be. I've heard that Nick spent a lot of money, and maybe it was not always well spent. And at Vanderbilt, that's not going to go over well. I wonder if that was not one of the the first more public cracks in his facade? Because that did not help his reputation.
Well, when it gets into the chancellor world, I can't say I know a whole lot about what he did or didn't do inside the academic community there. I just know athletically, I thought he was about as close to a zero as you could get. And the truth of it is, he's a likable person. I don't know why he put out some of the stuff that he did right as he was being named chancellor, because he told me all of this, and it just didn't turn out to be true.
Oh, I think what he was doing is he was campaigning just as if he were a presidential candidate. It's almost like one of those things like when people say things in debates, you're like, okay, that's just campaign candidate. That's not what you're actually going to do. That's how he struck me at the time.
Yeah, well, um, I don't think he did much to help athletics, and I think that's very unfortunate. I think it's led to some of the problems that Malcolm Turner's trying to, deal with now.
No, he didn't. But in his defense, a little bit, he seemed to be pretty on board with a lot of things until the Vanderbilt scandal. And people privately have told me that was their impression. Now, it's hard to reconcile with where he took things from there, but I know people who know him and were in meetings with him. Now, I do think that Nick was the quintessential politician. And again, was going to tell you what you wanted to hear based on who you are and the circumstance at the time. And he may walk in a room an hour later and tell another audience something differently. But I know there was some evidence and some thought that he was not anti-athletics, but that was the thing that changed a lot.
Well, you've brought up an issue that I have no doubt changed dramatically almost overnight. What they were willing to do and what they weren't willing to do. It was such an ugly situation, and it brought a lot of national unwanted publicity to the school. I don't doubt you're right about that.
Next question from Mr. Vandy, and this will be the last one. What do you think of this year's signing class for football?
I was surprised. It appeared, and look, I'm no recruiting expert. I'll leave that to a lot of other people that really know. So understand, anything I put out there when it comes to recruiting is laughable because I know virtually nothing. But what I do know is it appeared that they came on in the last week or so better than most people anticipated and got a little bit more done than was expected. That said, it's like it is most years where they're at the bottom. Once say the number 58 that it was ranked as a recruiting class of the whatever it is 130 Division I schools that play football. So, what does that mean right now? Probably not much. In a couple of years, you'll have a better clue as to whether it was any good or not.
Well, two things. I think that they
Yeah,
had to address quarterback.
You need to clean up my mess here.
Well, no, you didn't. I'm just reflecting on what you said. They had to have quarterbacks, right? And you see highlight films. That's what those are. You don't see the screw ups, but those three kids look like kids who have some ability. Okay, they have different skill sets. The right kid to me is really intriguing. The one that they flipped from UCF, which really surprised me because they were in a battle with Northwestern. They usually don't win those. In fact, they just lost one with Jordan Butler. So that's the concern, or that was concern A, and I think they addressed that better than any of us had anticipated. So there's that. B, you've got to have quality defensive linemen at Vanderbilt. They lost one, but at the same time, when you get transfers, a lot of times they don't really count in any recruiting class, and so they get the kid or Malik Langham from Florida, who at least looks the part of an SEC defensive lineman from what I've seen him briefly in practice. I don't know that he's going to be a star, but he at least looks like the ones everybody else gets. And they get the Derek Green kid who signed with Oklahoma. and never played and transferred to Vanderbilt, was not eligible last year. Neither was Langham. So I don't know what recruiting class those guys technically count in, but if you want to count them in this class, and Derek Mason made that point, that does change the perception there a little bit. Now, those are two kids that I think are going to end up playing for them in a significant role, probably sooner rather than later.
Well, you want me to reverse the roles here and ask you a few?
Ah, you bet.
Okay. Is their intention to start a freshman day one against Mercer?
I don't
Is
know
it
that they'll
Mercer
have a
they play?
choice. I don't know
Is
that
it
they'll have a
Mercer?
choice. Yeah, it is
Yeah.
Mercer. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it either be that or a JUCO, I think. So,
So are they out of the transfer portal business?
I don't know that they are, but that's 100% speculation. I mean, look, if there's a transfer quarterback out there who can play, who wants to come, then of course you consider that guy.
Now, round one of that has not worked very well, but frankly, all of the other options weren't anything to write home about either. First of all, it seems to me that it would be really unfair to expect a freshman on day one to start here in the Southeastern Conference. That said, they may not have any choice, and that may be where they are. This goes back to in the final year and a half of the Kyle Shermer era, they needed to be doing a hell of a lot better job of identifying his successor than what they did. And that is an area that a fan can sit there and say, this is where this coaching staff has failed.
Well, and with Derek, self-preservation has been his best quality as a head coach. He always knows how to spin things to get himself more time, and he did it again this year with the Waves comment. And next year has got to be a rebuilding year. I wonder if he will not position this, because again, they're going to have a new starter at quarterback, as this is the beginning of the foundation, and set himself up to where he's saying, well, okay, we're not expecting to be contending for a bowl this year, but this is when we're laying the pieces for 2021, and position it as, okay, if we can just get better, I think I can do big things in 2021 and keep his job that way.
Well, here's what we don't know. We don't know what went on in the conversation with Malcolm Turner and Derek Mason. There's, one school of thought out there that, Malcolm Turner may be saying either get to a bowl, get to 6 wins and get to a bowl, or else. Or it may be that, that Derek can spin this in such a way. But here's what I do know. I think it's fair to assume that will show up in ticket sales. And at the very end, unless something dramatically changes, you're going to have the embarrassment of Tennessee absolutely taking over that stadium for the final game of the season. And that's not a real good prospect. Those are the things that are going to happen unless he can show some real improvement. And I don't think he's going to be able to placate people with, this is the beginning, we're laying the foundation, and a year or two from now it's going to be better. I think it's going to have to be a quicker fix than that.
Okay, this would be a bold move, but if I'm Malcolm Turner, and I guess this could get played against you as well, you didn't let me pick my own coordinators, to which I would say, well, you've had 6 years, but there's a coaching convention coming up in Nashville. Gosh, and I can't remember the date on it, but it's coming up soon, and I believe that's the same convention where David Williams discovered James Franklin a few years back and had a relationship with him and had him on his radar. Frankly, the best thing that David has ever done was have that conversation and hire James at a spot where we are all going, oh, that's what they're doing, and we know history. If I am Malcolm, I would think hard about asserting some control over the coordinator hires and thinking that, okay, if I'm stuck with this coach for next year, when I think the price tag to get rid of him was probably in the $12 to $15 million range, I think that drops by probably over half for making a change for 2021. I think the cost is not cheap at that point, but I think it's a lot less expensive than it is. And again, these are all allegedly statements because who really knows? They're private and they don't share that stuff. But just from distilling what I've heard from different places, it was going to be expensive to walk away. If I'm Malcolm, I'm thinking Derek has gotten more than a fair shake. The facilities aren't great, but a lot of their issues have not related to facilities. They related to game management and just basic common sense stuff that coaches should do that he has failed to do. I'm looking at this as an opportunity to potentially use coordinator hires to evaluate a guy that I might want as my full-time head coach a year or two down the road.
Yeah, and look, it's a slippery slope because an athletic director has to take charge, and yet that's an area that normally is pretty sacred, where a football coach gets to decide who his people are. The problem is Derek's history in this area is not particularly good. He has brought a lot of coaches in here, appears to have run off a lot of coaches over the years, if we're being honest about it. And so it may well require Malcolm Turner and others inside that athletic department to get more involved in it. I do know this. They need a change in offensive coordinator, and it needs to be somebody pretty good. This thing desperately needs an infusion of life, of creativity, of sort of let's throw caution to the wind because nobody's expecting anything. So let's dazzle them. Let's surprise them. Let's let people know that we're here to try to make this something better.
Well, if they do make changes, that will be in year 7, offensive coordinator number 4, defensive coordinator number 4. Now, that does include Derek Mason in that number, so there's an asterisk
Right.
next to that one. And I think they're on their 4th special teams coordinator. And the one they have now, frankly, I thought was pretty good last year, Devin Fitzsimmons. So maybe that one won't change, or maybe it will. Maybe Devin gets a better job and moves on. But I've never studied this. I don't even know how you would. But I wonder if there's ever been a coach that has been able to throw that many coordinators on an altar in that short a time and still be standing at the end of it all.
That is a lot of stuff. And this is why I think Malcolm Turner say to Derek, what's going on? And maybe we need to help you a little bit.
Well, speaking of lots of stuff, we have now covered an hour's worth of ground. You've been very generous with your time, and I think it's time for that to end the podcast. But thank you for joining us today. Tell folks about your show, where they can find it, and, of course, promote your Twitter handle, which, believe it or not, you do have one.
Yeah, and it's George Plaster TN. And if you were to go there right now, you would see what's kind of been important to me over the weekend. I just am totally stunned by the tragedy that took the lives of these 2 BGA kids, one of whom, Clay Beathard, I knew pretty well. I guess I would just ask people at this Christmas season, say a little prayer for these families, because I cannot imagine the level of hurt and grief they are going through.
Oh yeah, that was absolutely awful, and those folks have been in my prayers and will continue to. It's and having come to the brink of losing a child this time 3 years ago. Fortunately, it never happened. It's something I don't even want to imagine. And this close to the holiday, burying a child is just excruciating. I'm sure that doesn't even do it justice. But yes, the BJ families should all be in our prayers, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
Listen, thank you. Merry Christmas to everybody. I hope that this is a holiday season that turns out to be the best one ever for you, and look forward to a great 2020.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you as well, and I've appreciated you joining us this year.
Absolutely. I've loved doing it. Let's keep it going.
He is George Plaster of Nashville Sports Radio. I'm Chris Lee, host of the Vandy Sports Podcast. Merry Christmas to everyone. I will probably do one more podcast later in the week, but no promises. If not, have a great week. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again very soon with more episodes of the Vandy Sports Podcast.